table, as you have seen in the list of participants, and I thank all of them for being with us. We have some easy task, easy to define, not easy to tackle, very difficult to tackle. And I resume the two main objectives, that is to bring together our universities in Italy and UK to share the response to this crisis. So innovation in teaching, innovation in mobility, innovation in e-learning due to the pandemic. And the second one is deciding, and that's what we'll try to decide at the end of the roundtable, thanks to the conclusion from Rachel, a set of a few actions to decide together to share for the reopening in September, in the autumn semester, and also I would say also probably in the next academic year in any case. So in what we call in Italy phase 3, so September with the blended teaching, and probably we hope as soon as possible non yet defined phase 4, that is when we go back to a normal life, even if the normal life will be different from what was normal life before. And so we expect to have this list of actions. The topics that will be addressed is how we shifted to online teaching and learning during this, what we call in Italy, phase 2, in any case, in spring 2020, and what are the problems and also the opportunities created by this way of teaching and learning that is common for the telematic universities, but not in the experience of the so-called traditional universities as are represented by the Rectors' Conference, in Italy at least. And so what could be the balance between keeping some experience of what we did in last months of online teaching and teaching in presence, as it is in the goals of our universities as we decided in the Rectors' Conference. So to go back as soon as possible, provided that safety and security are assured to presence of the students and teachers in our universities. The second point is the mobility. We experienced in the last 30 years that Erasmus projects and also many other programs of mobility of teachers, scholars, and students is probably one of the most promising experience of our university now all over the world. And how can we now tackle the situation, especially in the autumn semester for this? There will be also a blended mobility. Some will be personal mobility, some will be a virtual mobility of students. We are not going to talk about financial problems, not going to talk about what the European Commission will decide for the Erasmus students, but we are talking about how we will arrange, organize our exchanges in the new situation, taking into consideration that the situation is Europe is evolving with a timing that is not faced with the timing of many other continents, where maybe the worst situation is yet to come. And the last point is the challenges that we are facing in the autumn semester, that what we learn from this crisis, what will be permanent, what will be changed, and what we can do to increase the higher education in our countries. We look at the British universities with as you know, with a great interest. We have thousands of Italian students that have been in the UK universities or that are longing to go again to UK universities. So that's why this meeting with the British Council, that I thank you very much for the opportunity, is very promising for us. We will have to tackle the point also with other continents and countries, but I think that UK is for sure maybe the best preferred destination for thousands of our students, and we look to the British University with a great interest, as you know, since long time. And so how can we deal with the new situation that we will be facing from autumn, when we will have a completely different situation. I conclude that I think that probably this pandemic one day or another, but as soon as possible, I hope, will be finished. But I think that in a perspective of medium term, that won't be the last one. Probably we, in our lifetime, we will see. I think that a lesson that we have to learn from this experience is that even if when this will be over, we have to remember what to do to be prepared to other kind of crises similar to this. Because from an ecological point of view, I think that we are going to face very radical and critical problems in the near future, as we all know, because we are trying now to put, for sure, the pandemic in the first point of the agenda, but we have not to forget that we have very ambitious goals to 2030 that are still waiting for our actions. So I finished because I had 10 minutes. So as we adopted the UK lifestyle, I want to be in time. I thought it a good example. So I give the floor to Rachel Lowney, that is the Director of British Council Italy, for her introduction. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Professor Tira, for that really comprehensive introduction to our roundtable. It's a really great pleasure to welcome you all to the Roundtable Higher Education event this afternoon. And it's such a pleasure to work in partnership with CRUI. And a really big thank you to our UK and our Italian speakers for accepting our invitation and for joining us today. I joined the British Council Italy as country director just in January this year. It has been the most incredibly interesting and challenging start to a new job, as you might all imagine. Before that, I was in Germany as country director there and worked very, very closely with the higher education sector, also a very important partner country for the UK in terms of all of what we're going to be talking about this afternoon in the university sector. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today because it's been very challenging, almost impossible actually, to engage with stakeholders in a way that I would normally do in a new role. So meeting you today is kind of extra special because we're starting to actually make contact with, or I'm starting to make contacts and meet some really important partners in our education work. Professor Tira has already set out what we're going to talk about this afternoon, so I'm not going to repeat that, but it is a real opportunity that COVID-19 has thrown at us, turned our lives upside down in every single way, and universities are no less impacted by the transformation to our lives. And I like to think about the role that the British Council plays with our partners in the countries where we work, and particularly in the sophisticated developed world like in Italy and in Europe, is that the UK and these countries where we work come together to tackle problems that we share. And it's that knowledge transfer and that learning that is so crucial that we will be also testing out today in this event. As Professor Tira said, I am going to try my best to summarise some of the key points, maybe not actions, that might be a bit ambitious, but let's say some areas for us to explore further that come out of our discussions this afternoon. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that so that we have plenty of time to hear from our speakers. And on that note, I'd like to introduce my colleague Bianca Steger, who is our Director, Education and Society for the Europe region, British Council Europe region. She's based in Amsterdam and she's Dutch. We've worked closely together for several years, and it's really, really great you're here this afternoon, Bianca. So before we hear from our other speakers from the sector, Bianca is going to set the scene a bit and set the context from an overall European perspective. So I think we get the picture within which we're working. thank you, everybody. I hope you all enjoy this afternoon as much as I'm looking forward to it. Bianca, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for this introduction. And thank you very much, Professor Tiga, also for your interesting starts. I hope you can all hear me clearly. Yes, fine, good. Really pleased to be here together today. I feel really honored to be surrounded by these excellent speakers from the UK and Italy. Surrounded even in this virtual world, I would say, so that's quite interesting, but we got used to this kind of working environment during the last couple of months, I have to say. What we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, it has shown us that we as human beings are very vulnerable. But what it has also shown us, I think, it's an extraordinary human resourcefulness and potential. And the decisions that we are making today will have long-term consequences for the future of education. And that's why I think it's so important that we have this kind of peer learning activities that we have now, today, in this dialogue with you as CRUI and the speakers and participants and us as British Council. And we as British Council, as Rachel already mentions, we are organizing this kind of peer learning activities all over Europe, all over the world, actually. And one of our most important priorities for the coming months, for the coming year, is to focus on higher education, on partnerships, on insights and dialogues. So I would say watch this space. I would like now to share with you some examples of other European countries before we focus on the UK and Italy, how universities have reacted to COVID-19 and also how they envisage the immediate future. And I will focus on France, Germany and Spain. And after that, I would like to share with you some research insights from UNESCO. So starting with France. Currently, all universities are offering online classes through video conferencing software such as Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc., etc. And for the next academic year, most higher education institutions will continue to offer these online courses. They hope to return to normal courses during the second trimester. Some higher education institutions plan to reopen face-to-face, depending on, let's say, the measures of the government, the French government, in the coming weeks. But that's the plan. The international organization Campus France, which is basically a sister organization of us, the British Council, they will put online a national catalogue on all distance learning courses that will be available for students, but also explicitly for international students. In Spain, during the pandemic, CRUI, which is probably an organization that you are familiar with, which is the Conference of Principals of Spanish Universities, together with the Ministry of Education, they have launched an online support platform for universities. This platform, it hosts resources, including curriculum support, teacher training materials, and assessment materials. And all Spanish universities have now moved to online education. Very interestingly, I think, when we look at the upcoming autumn semester, most universities are in principle planning to open up their buildings, their campuses, in order to provide face-to-face education, if possible. That's what they say. Of course, they will need to take into account the social distancing rules and other health and safety rules. And this is very different to the approach that we see in Germany. In Germany, the university semester started online on the 20th of April. Teaching is now delivered almost exclusively online. As you probably know, this semester starts in different federal states at different stages, but most of it started in April. Here we see that research at universities and research institution is currently still taking place under strict conditions, so in the buildings. And libraries and archives can also operate if they adhere to the social distancing and other rules. However, what we see here for the autumn semester is that online education is the norm. Universities are very, very prudent to promise opening up their buildings, their campuses for face-to-face meetings. So I think that's quite interesting if you compare that with the approach that the Spanish universities have. So basically what we see in Europe is a very diverse picture, if you wish. Most universities are planning to continue to offer online courses, at least in the first semester. Most of them hope to offer online courses in the first semester, but they hope to offer face-to-face courses in the second semester, with the exception of Spain. What is, I can think, quite important is that since higher education institutions are autonomous, they are expected to make their own judgment following the national public health guidance. So it really depends a lot on the demographic profile of the staff, on the size of the university, on student populations, etc., etc. So what we will see, I think, in Europe is a different form of blended teaching all over Europe. Basically, what we also know is that it's not business as usual. There will be a lot of consequences, and one of the consequences that Professor Bira already mentioned is the virtual mobility. Big consequences for both staff and students. I think it's also important to mention and underline that we are not only talking about student mobility, but also staff mobility. Which all will have a huge consequence on the goal, the European goal of having 50% of student mobility among students. And again, a big consequence on Erasmus Plus programs or revenues of universities. Also a big consequence on the diversity of staff and students at universities. And I'm sure we will hear more from our colleagues that are on the agenda today. As a last remark, I'm very happy to share with you some insights from a UNESCO report that I happened to read a couple of days ago. It's a report, a research on education in post-COVID world, which I really like the word post-COVID, whenever that will be. This is a research that's presenting 9 ideas for public action, concrete action. So it's a research that is not only focusing on the higher education sector, but still I think some of the ideas are quite interesting for the higher education sector. Let me share with you 3 of these ideas that I've picked up. The first one is make free and open source technologies available to teachers and students. Open education resources and open access digital tools must be supported. Education cannot thrive with ready-made content built outside of the pedagogical space and outside of human relationships between teachers, professors, and students. The second idea is ensure scientific literacy within the curriculum. This is the right time for deep reflection on curriculum, particularly as we struggle against the denial of scientific knowledge and actively fight misinformation. I think that's another very interesting one for further discussion. And the third and the last one is to promote student, youth and children's participation in rights. Intergenerational justice and democratic principles should compel us to prioritize the participation of students and young people broadly in the co-construction of desirable change. So you may or may not agree with these ideas. I think they are interesting ideas for further debate and engagement for education organizations and cultural organizations like us. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bianca, for your presentation, for the overview of some new countries and for the results of this research. I think, Rachel, is it me now introducing Professor Betta? We may.
Yeah, I think so. Is that okay with you, Professor Tierra?
Yeah, that's fine, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
So we go on and then we have a discussion at the end. It's okay. So even if we can use the chat for asking questions, then we will take all of them at the end. So Professor Giovanni Betta is my dear colleague, rector of the University of Cassino and Lazio Meridionale. He's the delegate in CRUI for the academic teaching and learning. So he works and coordinates all the delegates of the Italian universities for teaching and learning. So he has the possibility of observing how the university have turned to online distant teaching and what are the results. He knows very well the figures and what was the percentage and also the success of this very quick transformation we had to act in February, March. So I give him the floor and thank you, Giovanni, for being with us.
Thank you, Maurizio. Good afternoon. I will try to do a little overview on what has happened and some ideas on what will happen in autumn and in the future. As you know, education and higher education system was one of the first to be affected by lockdown strategies. University are indeed the place where many people from different cities and countries meet and are therefore highly risk over the spread of COVID-19. In April 2020, schools and universities were closed in about 200 countries, and these measures affect over 1.5 billion learners. The traditional face-to-face higher education system was largely unprepared for the lockdown. No plans for a massive shift to online teaching were available. But after an initial phase, most universities replaced all face-to-face teaching with online teaching. In most countries, the higher education system have reached in an extremely quick and effective manner with few or no additional resources. Actually, it can be argued that more progresses on online teaching has been made in the last 3 months than in the last 20 years. While we are still in this emergency phase, it is useful to reflect on the challenges and open issues, as well on the potential benefits of online teaching and the lesson learned. For the autumn semester, most of the Italian universities have planned a kind of, I say, dual rather than blended teaching. We will have in-class teaching that will be also video recorded or streamed. In fact, according to some feedback collected by us during our teaching activities, most students are very happy with some aspect of online teaching and are asking to have, for example, the streaming option available to them in the future, even if the lesson will be given in class. The solution to open again to face-to-face learning is, as you can understand, welcome by both teachers and students that believe that classroom atmospheres and the on-campus interaction and socialization are critical aspects missing, completely missing from online education. This new approach, this dual blended new approach requires some aspects that have to be considered that I want to share with you. The first prerequisite for online teaching is certainly the availability of an adequate broadband network infrastructure, as well as the availability of at least one suitable hardware device for professor and for each student. As far as the network connection is concerned, while the European situation has improved in the last 5 years, we go from 78% of households with the internet connection in 2015 to 88% in 2019. There are still some critical situations in certain countries or in certain geographical areas. For example, in the southern of Italy, we have only about 7% of households with an internet connection. As far as the hardware devices are concerned, the situation still varies significantly by countries, with a leading position, for example, in Switzerland, where we have 65 laptops for 100 people. The number of devices, of course, increase very much if you consider mobile phones, but as you know, these devices are certainly not an optimal solution for e-learning. The second technical issue for online education is related to e-learning platforms. At the beginning of the COVID emergency, traditional universities, at least in Europe, were not involved or had a minimal involvement in online teaching, and therefore were not adequately equipped with the ECT system and platforms for massive online learning. This issue was, however, quickly solved, at least for video conference software for synchronous online teaching with the help of technology providers. The choice of the most suitable online platform, taking into account the specific need of each higher education institution, needs to be done in a systematic way. In general, for example, it is preferable to adopt the same system platform for all courses in the same university. This was not happened during this phase 1 and 2. As far as the other software is concerned, for example, learning management system, learning content management system, and online forums, universities have just widened and deepened their use on the programs that were already adopted before COVID. These systems would, however, in my opinion, require additional attention by higher education institutions in the new normal stage if they want to increase their online offer. In addition, in order to better exploit e-learning software, we have to remember the different generation of students and professors that are on the floor. We are currently in a situation in which digital immigrants are teaching to digital natives. So teachers and professors need therefore to be adequately trained and supported for the most effective use of online teaching tools. Another important aspect that should be considered before the hardware and software concerns the organization, let me say reorganization of teaching activities. During the COVID emergency, due to the time pressure and also to the lack of experience, most universities just transformed the in-class lesson into online synchronous or asynchronous lessons. The adaptation of contents and the teaching formats has been left mostly to the initiative of each professor. Really, a significant restructuring of the study programs would be needed to make them more suitable for being offered online, probably integrating both online synchronous teaching with asynchronous teaching and online communities practice. In the new normal, let me say, higher education institution that want to increase the online offer, we need to start a deep and systematic analysis of pros and cons of different organization features and the possible reorganization of their teaching activities. Some questions that need to be answered are: how could online or blended learning elements or courses be included in traditional study programs? How should in-presence activities be included in online programs? It is better to have synchronous or asynchronous teaching or a combination of them. What is the correct relation between HCT requirements and teaching hours for synchronous and asynchronous activities? How should the semester structure, weekly timetable be modified for online teaching? How should other teaching activities, laboratories, be organized? I can say some possible suggestions. Of course, we have to divide the teaching contents into smaller units to help students focus. We have to involve a teaching assistant in providing online support. We have to combine online learning and offline self-learning effectively. There are some important pedagogical issues to be considered. The final goal of each study program is to provide students with a set of knowledge and competencies carefully defined during the design of the study program. Some competencies, in particular those related to the doubling descriptors, applying knowledge and understanding, making judgments, communication skills, are not easily taught online. This is particularly critical for technical scientific programs, in which practical activities are particularly important to provide students with all the needed competencies. Concluding, this emergency has provided some potential positive inputs for the digitalization of the higher education system. Significant and to some extent unexpected progresses has been made by many universities in Europe and around the world. Maurizio told about numbers. At the end of March, the 88% of the courses of the Italian university were all taught online. But I think it demonstrates our capability to adapt to unforeseen situation. But the goal is now to understand what we can save of this experience. Some choices and strategies were affected by the urgency of the emergency situation and still require a more systematic analysis and discussion, and this workshop could be a good can give a good input to the discussion of what we can do in the future. The open question which I would like to answer in closing my short contribution is whether the COVID pandemic has irreversibly changed higher education, or instead after emergency we will everything go back to the previous situation. In my opinion, traditional higher education system will not go back to normal, only in class activity, but it will go to a new normal state, characterized by online teaching integrated with the in-class teaching that also are video recorded and or streamed. The traditional university should not become an alias of current online telematic university, but rather exploit the digital technology while keeping a strong link between research and teaching activities and the unique on-campus student experience. Therefore, traditional universities should take advantage of the experience made during COVID emergency to reshape the contents as well as the didactical methodology of the study programs in order to meet the changing students' needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, for your presentation. You both gave us figures and facts, but also some interesting reflection at the end of what could be the future. So thank you. It was really very interesting. So Rachel, I think we make, even if Anthony is Italian, now he acts here as being British. So you may introduce him.
Thanks, Professor Tira, and thank you so much, Giovanni Betta, for such an interesting, well, a series of inputs and facts and figures that I was trying to make note of. It's very, very, very good. So yes, I'm really pleased to now introduce our next speaker, Anthony Muscatelli. Anthony is the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of Glasgow. And we're also delighted that Rachel Sanderson is with us too. She is the Vice Principal at the University of Glasgow. So please, Anthony Muscatelli, over to you. You're on mute.
Apologies for that. That's a common mistake, a rookie mistake. But thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Professor Tira, for inviting us to speak in this session. Grateful to British Council and CRUI for bringing us all together. We are particularly, actually, we have very strong links to Italy as a university. We have around 500, 600 of our students are from Italy. It's the largest number from Europe alongside Germany. So it's a particular pleasure to be here today. I'm going to divide my task with my colleague Rachel Sanderson in the sense that I'll speak a bit about learning and teaching and how we've adapted and how we're planning for the new academic year. And then Rachel will speak a bit to what we're doing around student mobility and the international perspective of what we're doing. So one thing to point out, just to respond to a point that Bianca made earlier, it's really important that although there's a lot of autonomy in the UK universities, as you all know, actually public health regulations, like in Italy, have impinged on us very heavily. We haven't really had very little chance to adapt in any way because we moved very quickly into lockdown. And as we're coming out of lockdown, even though, as I say, we are autonomous, public health regulations, whether they're in England or Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland, because they are regionally divided in the UK, will still mean that we are likely to have to follow some quite strict regulations and to adapt our own patterns within that. What I would say is that we know from our experience so far that, like in Italy, as Professor Betta was saying, we've really responded very much in an emergency mode to what happened in February, March. Luckily for us in Glasgow, we'd almost finished our teaching, so the translation to online teaching was limited, and most of it was in the form of shifting to pure online. Our examinations moved online very smoothly. I would say that it's quite remarkable that, as people have pointed out, resourcefulness of our universities. 98% of our examinations were completed, which is the same level of completion that we would have had in terms of on campus in any previous year. And one of the big successes for us, I think, was not only the creation of the online exam system in a short period of time, but also the 24/7 helpline that we set up, mostly staffed by students themselves, actually, to try and help students through the online process. But as we're now moving to a different phase, which is that of preparation, we know from surveys that we've done from with our student body and our international applicants that the students who want to study at the University of Glasgow or are returning to the University of Glasgow, the overriding factor for them is not simply the learning and teaching experience, but also the experience that they have on campus, both in relation to learning, but also in terms of the facilities, the community, the student community, and the wider experience through social events, student societies. So that matters to them. So when we speak of adapting to what happens next year, and we of course have to stay within public health regulations, we've decided very quickly that we couldn't essentially move to a model which is essentially online. We decided very early that very few of our current and potential students would wish a fully online experience, and we would be providing a genuinely blended or dual model, as Professor Betta called it. So we will be combining online lectures. It's very like with face-to-face teaching. It's very unlikely that we will be able to hold online lectures to very large groups because we cannot see the regulations changing to such an extent, given that there probably will be a second wave at some point in Europe and including the UK. We will probably put all our large groups teaching online, but this will be supplemented with a greater number of much smaller learning events. Now, of course, in the UK, we're very used to the seminar and tutorial model, which is part of our teaching model in Glasgow as well. And what we'll be doing is essentially enhancing that as much as possible, and also making much greater use of graduate teaching assistants to help ensure that our students have a substantial amount of face-to-face learning. And of course, if a vaccine is found during 2021 and things do return to normal, we can moderate down again into more face-to-face in terms of larger venues as well. There are, of course, major challenges here. Professor Betta mentioned some of these. We have had to put in place a multi-million-pound investment to adapt our facilities like labs and teaching rooms to support physical distancing. We've had to enhance our digital infrastructure and skills, indeed, because enhance the skills we employ to support the greater load on online learning. And we've had to purchase solutions, particularly in areas like lab virtualization, which Professor Betta mentioned, because we have to teach some lab-based subjects remotely as well. Fortunately, we've been able to adapt existing projects. For instance, Glasgow were awarded a £1 million grant by Innovate UK, which is one of the UK's innovation funding agencies, to develop application in the virtual reality and augmented reality sphere. And we've been able to adapt that to remote learning to create some apps, particularly around lab teaching in life sciences and also physics. There are a number of key elements which we are incorporating into our teaching next year, from effective pre-arrival support and induction to active engaged communities of learners. So we're working very hard with our student bodies to ensure that students are actually going to also engage in peer learning so that we create that on-campus experience. Professor Betta mentioned the appropriate balance of asynchronous and synchronous. We believe that both have a place. But we do also want to have on-campus meaningful face-to-face contact with academic staff, and we will be building that in. There's a very strong partnership in our university with the student community, and Bianca mentioned curriculum development, co-creation, and we are adapting our curriculum to that. I'll stop here and hand over to Rachel, who'll speak a bit about student mobility and the international sphere. But I agree with Professor Betta, we're not going back. I think even if things were to normalize next year, I'm convinced that actually we will settle in a new equilibrium, which is with more blended learning. Rachel.
Thank you, Anton, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak today. It's always wonderful to have the chance to connect with colleagues from elsewhere and to learn more about what your plans are in this kind of peri-COVID and post-COVID environment that well, the latter we hope to be in sooner rather than later. On the student mobility side, yes, I think as Anton has just indicated, you know, in addition to thinking through the implications for learning and teaching, we also do have to think through the broader implications of the student experience. What kind of student experience will we be offering our students? And student mobility has been something that we have been very proud at Glasgow to be able to offer to our cohort of students at all levels. And we have done a lot of work over the last few years in improving our student mobility numbers. We're now sitting at about a quarter of our undergraduate population that will have some form of international experience before they graduate. And we have quite ambitious plans for how we offer more student mobility opportunities to our students going forward. But that is going to become more challenging. And what we have found is that many of our partners globally have suspended all mobilities for the first semester. And this is something that at Glasgow we have not been keen to do. We have set ourselves some quite clear criteria on which we will base our decisions around where we can send students in the first semester. And so, unfortunately, we will not be sending any students internationally, but we are hoping to send students within Europe. And you know, that will be based on FCO guidance and advice. It will be based on insurance liability. It will be based on any travel restrictions or borders that are in place at that time. But we are hoping to make a decision on all of our European mobilities by the end of this month, the 30th of July. And as it stands, we know that there are many of our Erasmus partners that are still quite keen to both accept our students but send students to Glasgow. So we're working very closely with them to make that a reality for students. And what we have found is that students are still desperate to travel abroad and have that experience as part of their degree programme. We have pivoted quite quickly to offering some virtual mobilities, and absolutely I think that will form a core part of our offering going forward. So there will be a mixture of virtual summer schools and winter schools with partners, but I think there will always still be a real demand for physical mobility and that kind of opportunity to completely immerse yourself in a different culture and country. And we want to find ways to make that possible for our students. One of the things that is quite problematic as it stands, though, is the Erasmus agreement. So Erasmus won't fund any Erasmus mobilities if they were 100% online. And in fact, they have got to have 8 weeks of physical placement. And if you cannot guarantee 8 weeks of physical placement, the ability will not be funded. So that's something that we're kind of lobbying around right now, because that does mean that some of our mobility partners will not be able to accept our students, because at this moment in time, they cannot guarantee 8 weeks of on-campus activity. So that is definitely something that we need to try and address. But overall, I think strong demand for physical mobility, we're seeing that not changing. But I do think as an organisation, in order to firstly actually expand the numbers of students being able to benefit from some form of internationalisation, but secondly, in respect to the pandemic directly, we know that we need to have more virtual mobilities being offered as well. And also beyond Erasmus, think through what traineeships might look like. And we actually piloted a programme just last year, which was a Global Ambassador programme. And we had some of our widening access students spend 2 weeks with alumni in Europe undertaking work shadowing. And that was phenomenally successful. And so, you know, we already know that the pandemic is likely to challenge some of the areas of our community, parts of our community that are already challenged by higher education. And at Glasgow, we have a very large widening access population. That is something that is very important to the institutional mission. But we need to find ways to ensure that actually those students are not left behind in a kind of peri-COVID and post-COVID environment, and that they are still being given the opportunities to travel and to have some form of international experience. So we're going to be working through our internship hub to look at what that might mean, the kind of funding that we'll put into place to help support that, and also more broadly looking at what internationalisation at home activities could potentially be going forward. So lots happening in this space, but for Glasgow right now, we're still very hopeful that we will be sending students in the first semester to some of our European partners, and also receiving students from those European partners as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Anthony and Rachel, for your presentation, for what you said. And I fully agree, and I really understand what you, Rachel, said. The wish of the students to go back moving and visiting, and I also understand very well, and I agree that with Anthony said that living in the campus is not just attending lessons, but it's a real experience of life that we all did, and that we really wish that our students can continue to have, to experience. So we go on with Giorgia Giovannetti, who is Vice Rector for Internationalization at the University of Florence, with a long experience in the field. And thank you, Giorgia, for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maurizio. Thanks to everyone for inviting me. I sort of interpreted in a different way what Marina asked me to do, and I interpret it in a way of concentrating on mobility. And what I will do is address 3 points plus one, more general to conclude. But I will address it from the point of view not of Florence University, but generally UK-Italy bilateral exchange. So my 3 main points are: first, I'll give you some numbers of the Italy-UK Erasmus outgoing and incoming students and related issues. Second, I'll briefly speak about COVID-19 and blended mobility. You already said that most Italian and UK universities will not go back to normal, mainly both Professor Betta and Muscatelli pointed this out, and will teach at least partially online. The extreme point is Cambridge, which was the very first university to announce that the whole academic year would have been online. The third point I'll make is I'm actually going to make a proposal to try and reduce the negative impact of COVID-19 on the mobility in the next academic year. So what about the first? What about the numbers? Well, both Italy and UK are between the top sending countries in absolute terms and top receiving countries for Erasmus students. However, the bilateral exchange has not been very high, even though it has been increasing. I believe that the relatively low number depends on mainly 2 issues: a still low number of programs in English in the Italian universities, and, sorry for this, a limited knowledge of foreign languages in the UK. We speak more English than you speak Italian. The second issue is difficulties for at least the top UK universities to sign Erasmus exchange contract, especially at the master level. So most exchange contracts are at the BA level, and this, I believe, can be traced back to the different university fees. I mentioned that the bilateral exchange are increasing. I'll give you some numbers. In 2010, the Italian students to the UK were 1,434, and only 726 from UK to Italy. Note the asymmetry, so fewer students from the UK. In 2017, so 7 years after, that's the last official data, the Italian increased to over 3,100 and the UK to 1,100, over 1,100. So the increase was respectively 6% and 4% in this year, so it was fairly large. The asymmetry is maintained. Note, and this I think could be useful for the debate later on, that the number of students that go abroad for the study in the Erasmus are actually lower than the one that they go for traineeship in the UK, not to other European countries, but for the UK, this is a pattern. And I think that therefore Brexit, for instance, could impact more negatively on the traineeship. Now, of course, we have a potential to improve on this number. I think the potential is actually high. Let me speak for Italy. We have to attract more UK students. We can increase the number of programs in English, especially at the BA level. Some Italian universities like Bologna and Trento, for instance, have started to offer complete BA in English, and others, amongst which also Florence, provide curricula and courses in English at the BA level in some fields like economics, engineering, mathematics. So actually this is going to increase the attraction for some of the UK students. Of course, we have to discuss issues related to the difference in fees at the master level. I think this problem can be solved, but this has been an issue with the UK. Many times, even at the master level, exchange are actually run with a BA courses on the ground that Italian may not be good enough to attend the master level, which is not true, and this has to do with the fees. Now, certainly, there is a lot of room to increase cooperation at the PhD level, which so far has been left behind because of the different structure in the two countries. So my second point was about COVID-19 and blended mobility. Was already mentioned in the debate that the COVID has triggered a certainly unplanned shift to distance and on-learning teaching. What about mobility? What does it mean for a student to attend online classes where he, she, or they is in Erasmus? What I say here is valid for any bilateral exchange, but particularly for Italy and UK, since these two countries have been amongst the most impacted by COVID-19 and the fastest to react to shifting from face-to-face teaching to online teaching. And this is what already Anthony has mentioned, for instance. Now, the Erasmus grant, and this was Rachel mentioned it already, will be awarded only if the student will be able to do at least part of the experience in person, and the percentage of the period that will be in person will be the one paid. She mentioned the 8 weeks, but actually each national agency can decide how many weeks are the minimum, because the EU left the agencies to decide. Certainly, to attend online lectures is safer than being in a class with no social distancing, and the social distancing is difficult. But to attend lectures online from home is not the same of being in a tutorial in Oxford or in class at UCL. I believe that the Erasmus experience can change the student life and can change the opportunities in terms of employment. By the way, not enough is known on the causal effect of Erasmus on labor market outcomes, mainly because there is no study of the selection bias. And I think this is an important point for debate, which is the different composition of students opting or not opting for studying abroad. The student deciding they want to be mobile and the student deciding that they want to stay at home. Now, of course, the signal for the labor market of an online Erasmus is very different from the fact of having lived in a different countries. Of course, there are positive things linked to it. Students, even in the online learning, can study in a different language. By the way, if they don't understand, they're actually likely to be left behind because the time lag between lectures and supervision is very high. So you cannot really catch up easily if you're left behind. It's much easier in a class than in an online lecture. Anyway, they experiment also different teaching methodologies, may be more applied in the UK, might be more historical in Italy, even if it's difficult to generalize. They meet online, students from different countries with different background. Anyway, having said that, I believe that the face-to-face experience is really different. And this takes me to my proposal. I think that if the student mobility has done, the mobility a student has done during the COVID emergency period has been online, even though I hope that we'll go back to normal, but I honestly believe that this is going to be difficult for the next academic year, the university should organize a short, say 1 week, 10 days, visit to the partner university where the student has spent the Erasmus term to meet in person the professor seen through the PC camera, to see how is the university, to meet the local students, to be introduced to the culture and the attraction of the place. This period, and I think this is important, can be also outside the period of study abroad, if the health conditions are considered risky in the period of the study abroad. So this, my proposal is, any student which is going to be in mobility should have the opportunity to actually go for at least 1 week, 10 days, and be immersed in a different cultural experience, which is to live in a different countries. And I think that the money which the Commission is going to save on the grant, if it's only given for the standard face-to-face mobility or physical mobility, should be used for this short-term mobility. Alternatively, the individual universities could use their own budget to organize this very short-term mobility. I believe that without it, the whole Erasmus program is actually going to be at risk because people want to move. There is a high demand. Already some of you have mentioned it for mobility, but virtual mobility is not the same thing. Now, let me conclude with a +1 issue, saying few words about the European University Alliances. What are the European University Alliances? They are, in the eyes of the EU, the university of the future. Last week, on July 9, the new European alliances were decided and 24 consortia were selected, which add up to the 17 of last year. And despite Brexit and despite the unclear status of the UK in terms of funding, 4 out of 24 consortium had UK partners. And imagine that the European Commission had said to the European University not to include UK partners in the alliances this time. That may be a penalty. So 4 of them still have UK partners. We were actually one of those, and I was very much in favor of giving a signal of the importance of having a UK partner. The alliances mean to overcome bureaucratic difficulties in double and multiple degrees, mean to have an increased mobility across Europe. Also a different type of mobility. Here is not only the physical mobility, but for instance, we could organize different courses. Let me say something. I'm an economist and Anthony is also an economist. I could teach 20 hours and Anthony can teach another 20, and we can have a complete course taught in 2 different countries that can be attended by mobile, but also immobile students. And this will open their mind. So ultimately, European University Alliances mean to form the European citizen for the future. And despite Brexit, I think that is absolutely essential for UK university to be part of the European Alliances, to be part of the Erasmus program, but is also for us absolutely crucial that the UK universities are partners in all this. And the Scottish University even more, Anthony. Thanks.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you very much for what you said, for the way you used for your enthusiasm. And I also agree that the alliances are very promising perspective for our universities. Really great. Thank you very much. The last speaker is Dr. Ute Steiger, Vice Provost for Europe and Director of the UCL European Institute. Uta, I was seeing her, now I don't see her anymore, but She's there. Okay, so the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you for the invitation. And just as I'm about to speak, the light goes out. I'm not quite sure how I'm meant to interpret that signal. There we go. So thank you very much for having us. I'm delighted really to be hearing all these different experiences from our different universities. And if it brings one thing into very clear focus, is that we're all in so many ways in the same boat. Big institution, not usually accustomed to hurried change, being forced to respond swiftly and nimbly to really complex and systemic change for a longer period of time. I have prepared a short PowerPoint so as to give you the diversity of views, if you like. But let me see if I can manage the technology, which is always a question. There we go. I'm not sure it is working at the moment. I seem to have a problem with it.
Yeah, it works. We can see the slides.
You can see the slides? Excellent.
Yes, great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think before I go on, I wanted to see just very briefly that I'm concurring with most of the previous speaker that rather than really radically new, some of the responses that we have had to develop towards the crisis actually accentuate already existing trends regarding the way we work, relate and interact and impart knowledge. And to our minds as well, we do expect that many of those trends are here to stay. And not least also to raise the question that some of the highly really consequential questions that are hanging in the balance beyond the day-to-day managing of what we want to be doing around the relationship between science and politics, between equity and constraint, and obviously, as we're here to discuss today, between domestic and international pull factors. And there are some challenges to this and some opportunities to this that I will be coming back to at the end of my short talk. But it was not only the challenges that I want to come back to, because there are, I believe, transformative possibilities as well that might allow us to do things differently beyond physical and national boundaries that might also be very positive for us in the longer term. So let me see. Do this just very briefly. So I'll talk about the learning and the way that we are looking at connected learning going forward at UCL, about mobility issues as well, and to what we might be able to take away from this. This is really the encapsulation of what we've been discussing, our temporary operating model, which is really not different from the way that you have mostly planned it. It's a digital first approach, if you like. So we will have some program level delivery of face-to-face teaching, but most of the teaching for term one certainly is going to be delivered in asynchronous and synchronous ways. Academic staff will be involved in the delivery of any face-to-face teaching, also for reasons I'll come back to in a moment. We have developed the guidance mainly for term one. However, it is our understanding that given the uncertainty, it is better to be continuing to plan for this potentiality for the rest of the year, rather than do some ad hoc planning around emergency delivery online, having to go back into lockdown, which remains a possibility. So we call it connected learning, which is effectively our way of understanding blended learning as we have all discussed it. And really what we want to stress with it is both the active and the collaborative nature of the learning that we want to achieve, being sensitive to the different contexts, social, geographic and otherwise, of our students. As such, we really want to align it as well, as much as we can, to what really would have been UCL's typical on-campus learning experience. Obviously, asynchronous learning for us, as you're all aware, is all the pre-recorded material and literature that we can provide to students to access in their own time. And I suppose the same thing if you've been experiencing, we could actually use existing tech platforms for this, Moodle and Lecturecast being the key ones among them. And the biggest really advantage for that is for us that it will allow flexibility for students who may face a range of barriers at accessing synchronous learning. But synchronous will, of course, remain as important to us as possible. We have invested in a lot of new interactive tech. Much of it has been around, but just rarely used, such as Teams, Zoom, and Blackboard Collaborate. Interesting, of course, is the question that we will have on the timeframes that we were used to for lectures. And when we spoke about maybe considering longer term effects of all of this, then such a shorter delivery of lectures rather than in a 3-hour delivery, for instance, is certainly likely to stay. I concur with every speaker before that the synchronous learning will also allow us to retain a sense of cohort, even if students are not in the same place. And while controversial and not entirely agreed, dual mode teaching is not something that we advise for most disciplines, at least. We will not be running programs entirely online. And that also has really practical reasons. With regard to the UK Competition and Markets Authority, for instance, there would be problems with online degrees only, but there are also implications for Tier 4 visas, for student numbers, and generally for degree recognition in other countries. So this is not something that we have ever thought about delivering. All of this, of course, is a massive change to the way we have been running things. So a big part of what we are investing in for next year is a staff development and support infrastructure. The core part of it is a Connected Learning Essentials program. It's our staff development program that comprises a huge amount of online resources and guidance, as well as some short live events. These are usually delivered through central support teams, particularly our Arena Centre for Research-Based Education and Digital Education. But really crucially, I think for us, that we wanted to ensure that this temporary infrastructure also includes faculty, learning technology leads, and departmental connected learning leads that will allow all staff to really adapt the resources to the needs of their departments, their particular pedagogical needs and circumstances. So decentralization really is a huge issue at UCL and will remain so, where the decisions around the specifics of teaching lie at the local level. And this has dropped off of the slide, but open science, which is something that UCL has championed, open access to publications and digital library, something that we have continued to invest in as well. What regards face-to-face teaching, yes, I agree entirely with Anthony, and we will be trying to allow as much face-to-face teaching as possible. We're currently expecting about 2 to 3 hours per week per student, but we will expect that this will take place on program rather than module level, with appropriate alternative activity for those who can't attend. Those 2 to 3 hours would not include any lab or studio-based learning. We're still developing planning around that. Part of the reason, and as I hinted earlier, is because of also the needs of UK visas and immigration policies, namely that international taught students will only receive their visas if their program includes some academic-led face-to-face teaching, either in term 1 or at least in the transition to term 2. And without a Tier 4 visa, as we in the UK are all too much aware, students are not eligible for post-study work visas either. So it's a huge discussion for us. We've touched on this previously. Assessment, we've trialed this quite successfully as well at UCL in this current academic year that's now coming to an end. And we will continue the use of this for the next one. So mainly moving to coursework and capstone assessment. We are developing a system which has proctoring functionality, but we don't expect that to go beyond piloting phase in the next academic year. But this is certainly something, talking again about long-term effects, that are likely to stay with us. I should also say that any summative assessment requirements will not really be contingent on the students having been able to do face-to-face sessions. And finally, enhanced student support. We've invested quite a lot in a new introductory program and in induction events for new students to help them have some of the buzz and the experience being at university, even if they're joining at this most extraordinary of moments. And several other platforms and kits are being developed to make them feel slightly more part of the cohort as they go on. With regard to mobility, just to move on to that part, the overview is again similar. The spirit is similar to everything we've heard so far, but unfortunately we have to offer our students, particularly those on a compulsory study abroad year program, that needs to be very, very precise. And so we've offered, we do know that we can't guarantee normal and uninterrupted study next year. We have to observe the Foreign Office travel advice. And of course, we're entirely dependent also on host universities' decisions on whether to take in or not students from UCL for next year. We're also finding it quite difficult that many students are in different situations and may not be able to take up any options in the same way. But just to briefly show these to you, these are our 4 options as we've set them out. The first is a virtual exchange in term 1, plus followed by virtual exchange or wherever possible in-person exchange in term 2. But of course, if both fall through for term 2, then there is a risk that the student might have to interrupt their studies. In fact, the risk factors are high on all options. So we think that there may actually be the possibility for in-person exchange, and we would fully support this to the best of our abilities, but students will have to take that decision now. And if they take the decision and then the host university has to close down, or if we go back into lockdown, then the offer might be cancelled at short notice or prior to the start of term or during it. And again, it would have significant implications for the students. So we do need to advise them of those. We have therefore offered many of those who are on a degree with a compulsory study abroad year to transfer to a 3-year BA. And we haven't yet had the responses back, but we expect that some students might be opting for that particular option. And finally, a 4th option would be to interrupt their studies, either with the intention of studying abroad in 2021, 22, if, of course, it is feasible and if places are available. And all of this goes also for British Council placements and work placements, even the voluntary year abroad. Which brings me to the last point. Obviously, we do have a lot of challenges that we've identified going forward. I'll run through some of them. I think one thing that we were quite keen to see is the untested strain on the systems that are caused by the very high volume of synchronous online sessions using a shared national infrastructure. So it'll be very interesting to see how UK universities respond to that. A second is a question of access. For students, of course, who are in different time zones, possibly have issues with connectivity, may have disability issues, but also more generally about concerns about how these developments sharpen the digital divide that we already see existing in societies. There is an issue also around intellectual property and copyright, especially from the pre-recorded teaching material. My colleague Alexandra Samuelson called it the porosity of the university, where we have no longer an entire control over where our material ends up. And that is something that we need to discuss in the future. But there may even be further discussions around security and privacy concerns. Particularly, we all have large numbers of students internationally in countries where access to virtual private network or similar might be blocked or at least monitored by state authorities. So again, questions of freedom arise, academic freedom, as do some concerns around our reliance on the big tech companies such as Apple, Google or Microsoft and their standards that we would have to accept. And that is before we even start about hands-on experimentation and lab experience and the additional workload for staff. That said, I think, and I'm going to finish on this, not all of it is just a challenge. We think that there's also some opportunities to be had. I mean, we have seen an acceleration of existing trends, exploiting the digital skills agenda to see the shrinking, the virtual shrinking of physical distance as a positive. We've seen also that this is in some ways an opportunity forced upon us to trial new forms and approaches that are more about the exchange of knowledge rather than physical exchanges. And just to give you one example, we have the an initiative around shared classrooms from the Alliance for Tech Institutions, which include UCL, the engineering faculty. It includes the Politecnico di Milano, the Technische Universität Berlin, and Centrale Suplec at Paris. And the concept here is aimed at providing an opportunity both for undergraduate and postgraduate module leaders to enrich their online learning and teaching through joint lecturing. And that sort of collaborative teaching might even make teaching a niche interest or value, niche interest topic more valuable and more possible long term if universities manage to pull together there. And what we certainly have seen is within UCL, the development of new modules that are rolled out across the faculty, across different disciplines, which can be taken by students of all year groups, and which aim to provide a sort of topical curricular provision, specifically attractive to affiliate students or third-year students who may opt out of the year abroad. So with that, coming to an end here, sorry if I was a little long, and to say all of that, of course, is without even mentioning Brexit, which I think we may want to come back to in the questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Uta, for the comprehensive presentation. And we have now, I could say, I don't know if Rachel agrees, 15 minutes for a discussion, so we are a little bit late. And then Rachel will draw up some conclusions. So the floor is open for questions, either written in the chat or raising the hand and taking the floor. Yes. I see the principal, I don't know the name, so anyway, who has the hand? Oh, you, it's Anthony, the principal, yes. Sorry.
Teams, sorry, apologies, Marisa. The Teams gives me this title, which sounds a bit formal. It's almost like a mafia movie, but anyway. Anyway, can I ask a question? Because it's Uta raised it. There's one of the things that the crisis has genuinely created is issues of unbalanced workloads in our universities. They're partly because of issues of mismatch of skills, but partly because of the fact that depending on in the UK universities, there is quite a lot of specialization of roles towards certain posts that are more research focused and others that are more teaching focused. And I just wondered, with us, it's certainly created a huge amount of thinking is going on at the moment about how we balance this, especially over the next year. I was interested in how this was being handled within the Italian university system, because it's a different system, of course, but because there's no doubt that this is going to be one of the biggest constraints that we face as we try to ramp up towards a blended, connected, whatever adjective we want to use, model next year.
I think we can collect maybe 2-3 questions and then open the floor to everybody who's willing to answer. So after the Godfather, now we give the floor. It's Florian, please.
Yes, I don't know whether that makes me the Son or the Holy Ghost now. Thank you very much for the invitation. Mine is not so much a question; it's more a comment that I just wanted to echo Giorgia Giovanetti's enthusiasm about the opportunities afforded by this situation for new forms of intensive collaboration. And you will have seen that Uta very diplomatically put centralization and decentralization both as an opportunity and as a challenge for UCL. And I think what what I would just like to stress is that from the experience of the classroom, but also from the experience of the activities that we've led with Italian partners that were all seed funded and all bottom up and all proposed by individual academics. It's really important, I believe, that these forms of collaboration remain very much flexible, and that we can really team up with, that we can create a structure where we can team up with colleagues in our disciplines and work together. And I think this is really one of the very interesting things that is beginning to emerge from this meeting. So I was staring at the chat very enviously and seeing the sort of Firenze Glasgow team taking shape under our eyes. But I think this is a kind of model which I feel we want to take away from a meeting such as this.
Yeah, thank you, Florian. I'm sure that is just an example, Florence, Glasgow. It's just other interventions, questions or comments also, or experiences or reactions or whatever. So while we are waiting, so I don't know if Giovanni or Georgia are willing to answer to Anthony. Georgia, maybe?
Well, on the unbalanced workload between teaching and research, I think probably Giovanni is more than me.
This is an open question. In Italy, research is the only way to increase the career, but teaching is an increasing load as well as the organization activities. In this day, there is a working group that composed by CRUI and another Italian structure, the CUN, that are working on a modified way to for recruitment and increasing in career. And now probably we have to rethink to the role of teaching in our university. Without, of course, research is for every one of us a fundamental task of each professor, but teaching load cannot be neglected anymore.
Let me add something on this to Vito. The main issue is that is really different, as Giovanni has pointed out, the career pattern that we have. Even the administrative work doesn't take out much teaching. So we have to do teaching, administrative, and research at the same time. Now, a lot of people have been complaining about the amount of teaching, the fact that the online classes increase the teaching load, basically. And what the response has been in general, something that Giovanni mentioned in the first intervention, which is a reduction of the numbers of minutes that each face-to-face lecture will have. So what will be 1 hour in the face-to-face will be something like 40 minutes in the online teaching. So this will give a little bit of room for change. But there is something to be said, which is that during an online class, you do double of what you do in a face-to-face. You don't repeat yourself, you don't make jokes, you don't go back to something that you have said. And speaking to a lot of Erasmus students, I had the impression that they really were overwhelmed by the amount of topics that we have done in the online teaching. So each of us has not realized that we were covering much more during the online teaching. So the workload is not only for the professors, but is also for the students. And I think a serious reflection on this should be done. And of course, for international students and Erasmus students, this is worse because it's teaching not in their own language. And therefore, the effort is even higher. And that's what I meant when I said there is a gap between lectures and classes or lectures and tuition, so that if you have not understood something, which in any case, in a normal class, you will raise your hand and say, can I ask a question I've not understood? You cannot do that during the online classes. It's very, very difficult unless you have very little. I mean, I've been teaching a PhD course with 4 people, and that was great. It was exactly like teaching in person. But if you have between 30 and 300 students, that's completely different.
Thank you, Georgia. There is Uta. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I just very briefly wanted to come back to the European University Alliances. UK universities have generally struggled to find a good position on this. There are some who do take part in them. A key issue that we have is around transferable credits. It's at the moment difficult as a student even to study and take your credits within 2 different universities in the UK, let alone abroad, and issues such as student fees, etc., will be coming into that. But I think we've all seen the strategic importance of those, particularly to provide alternative forms of mobility. At UCL, what we have been trying to develop further is the rollout of dually delivered degrees or master programs, which have an inbuilt mobility element in the sense that the students will spend part of their degree at UCL and part of the degree abroad. That is now obviously outside the COVID framework, and these programs see themselves affected as much as everything else. But I think longer term, strategically, that's the discussion we will be having within the UK as to how to embed our mobility much more structurally, also because we need to be realistic about the chances of us staying within Erasmus. We know that the European Commission is very likely to bundle up Erasmus with Horizon, and the current signals coming out of the negotiations around Horizon Europe aren't particularly encouraging. So we do need to find a way of at least ensuring that we continue to have bilateral and hopefully also multilateral agreements and programs in place to help us along.
There is a question from Jane Costello, and Uta already answered, but if somebody else wants to answer, I wonder if any of our speakers would be able to reflect on any of the issues of student well-being being explored by their institutions as they plan for the short midterm future. Uta already answered in the chat, but I don't know if, I don't know, Rachel, Anthony, Georgia, Giovanni wants to.
I was actually
Yes.
just finishing typing my response.
Oh, sorry, sorry,
No,
it's difficult to read the chat and to moderate.
Post up in the chat. So no, I mean, I think this is such a pivotal question, because we are very aware that students who are returning to the campus or joining us for the first time will require potentially more support than ever before, and that's not just how we're preparing physically for the return of students and staff on campus. And obviously we have to be really aware of public health guidelines around physical distancing, around measures that we'll put into place to safeguard our staff and student community, and that's something that we're working through right now. But also, how do we support students with mental health? And so some of the support systems that we've put into place during the pandemic thus far, in terms of the kind of the 24/7 help desk, that is something that we think we'll keep in place for quite some time, and we will review over the course of the first semester. But we've also created new community web pages, so we're being far more proactive at signposting resources and support that's available for our student community on campus, and having to take extra measures, of course, also in our halls of residence. So, that's a big issue. We may have international students joining us that will have to self-isolate for 2 weeks on arrival in the UK. And so do we have the right support mechanisms in place to accommodate that effectively? And the answer, of course, has to be yes, but it's making us think differently around the support that we have on offer to our students and how accessible it is to all of our students at any point, day or night. So I think it's a really good point, because undoubtedly there will be more support required. And I totally recognise what Uta was saying as well about also supporting our staff to support our students effectively. And so thinking about that training and development aspect for our staff community, to ensure that they are in a position to be able to provide support to students, whether that be for learning and teaching, or whether that be for broader kind of mental and emotional issues that those students may have. So I think we're going to see more and more investment in this space across the sector over the coming year.
Thank you. There are also some questions from Rachel Lone in the chat, but I think there are more than questions. They could be your final points that we can write down in the minutes and take for everybody. If I may say, my experience as rector, I also teach a course during this semester, 60 hours, not so much, but anyway. And my experience that the reaction of the students to the online lessons was synchronous. So I was in contact with students, was very positive. I recorded many more questions in this distance teaching than in 25 years or in class teaching. I don't know if they are shy in the classroom, probably. They are now hidden behind the camera, or I don't know, whereas they are more attentive. I cannot say, but in any case, they made many more questions. And also, we have also set up a little bit the questionnaire of the impression of the students of this experience of the last months, and the reaction was quite positive. So they were quite happy for the online teaching, apart from some cases. So they were very clear in pointing out those professors who did not accomplish their duties, and maybe more precisely than what they could have done in presence. But it's clear if they are not connected, they don't give materials and so on. But in general, the students, they recognize that the reaction of the university was very positive. So but this is just a first impression. So I think that you, Rachel, you may summarize your points in the conclusion. Maybe it's time to conclude because we were a little bit late in the interventions, but now, Rachel, the floor is yours for the conclusion, so that we can close in 15 minutes late, no more. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Professor Tira, and for such a rich discussion. I have tired fingers from typing and trying to make some notes, which I will try and make as sense-worthy as possible. I mean, I think that that there have been, if I just split it into kind of 3 concluding short sections. One is the synergies between the information, the input that you have shared from your various perspectives and institutions is really interesting. I mean, the words resilience and agility came up a lot, as well as the words opportunity and challenge. I think that I just want to say a little bit about some of the key messages I heard around opportunity, and then the ones around challenge. So on the opportunities, despite the fact that there are different ways of addressing, there have been and there are different ways of addressing the challenges of COVID, and Bianca gave us some examples from other countries outside UK and Italy. Some of the common themes here were looking at the blended approach versus the dual approach. There was some differing of opinions in this group, but very interesting to hear. And I personally hadn't thought about the difference between blended and dual, frankly. So I was really interested to hear the difference between those 2 approaches. There was quite a lot I heard around the flexibility on policy. So in what Uta was saying around, even if you haven't attended face-to-face, that doesn't penalise you around assessment. The fact that universities are now, myself being a linguist and having done a 4-year degree and thinking that the university might have said, okay, well, actually it'll be a 3-year degree, is like seriously, that seems extremely flexible. So there's a huge flexibility that seems to have been adopted by the university sector, which is really interesting to hear. The agreement around, I was going to say, of course, but the importance of face-to-face, despite the opportunity of online, and kind of the balance of those two. At the end, a comment around student behaviour. Professor Tira, I think it was you who said this yourself. You have so many more, as if there is actually more engagement from many of your students when you are lecturing or holding classes with them online compared to face-to-face. And we've noticed this in the English language teaching sector ourselves at the British Council, that some students have really become much more outgoing and come into their own. And it's just so interesting to see the differences in behaviour, and it really suits some kids, some students, and maybe it actually suits some teachers better to be teaching online. So that's an interesting one to consider. I think one of the big thing is the transformative possibility of what COVID has provided the sector. So interesting to hear from you about virtual traineeships. I was like, oh my God, how the heck does that work? Virtual semesters overseas, what, the whole semester virtually? Wow, incredible. I mean, I did a year abroad in France. I was like, wow, you can imagine I was a language assistant in France, but did everything online through a screen. Hey, why not? You know, now I could see that could work. If you'd asked me 4 months ago, I'd have said you were barking mad. And then the huge opportunity around teamwork between for staff, so for lecturers and professors, and the idea that you know, if you're sharing, I think it was your example, Professor Giovannetti, you know, that you have, it's a professor of economics, you could be lecturing in Glasgow, and then Anton could do the opposite in Florence, that type of thing, but virtually. The challenges that have come up, the inclusion, so the accessibility, of the disadvantage and the advantage, and that how are we levelling up is a risk within the virtual the virtual world. Workload and work-life balance has come up, and again, very interesting to hear about that from the university staff's perspective, but also the work-life balance from a student perspective. And I have that from my staff here in the British Council. They feel that they're just working much more than they did previously, coming to the office and going home. There's a kind of a real well-being, and you talked then about well-being and mental health, which is a key subject. And then mental health for staff. You know, it's a bit like the aeroplane thing. You know, you can't help somebody else until you put your own oxygen mask on. So how are we supporting our staff to help each other and their students to adapt to this new environment? There's lots more, but those are the things that I just managed to try and summarise by the end of this. I think it's. I mean, I asked a question there about evaluation, monitoring and evaluation. So if we think about kind of, well, what now? I suppose the question is really back to you. Of course, it's not for me to say that, and maybe that's something Professor Tira, with his colleagues at CRUI, and then you know, I talked to my colleagues Almut and Bianca, and of course Philo, and we come together and then come back to you with some suggestions. But it seems as if there might be some areas where there could be further exploration. I mean, question, is that a bilateral thing? I don't know. Is it actually more multilateral? Because this is about European universities looking at some of these very important agendas together. So those big things. And then, of course, there's a very specific action that's in the chat here, which is Glasgow and Firenze trying out short-term onboarding, I'd call it, or familiarisation visits. Really excellent idea. So there are some, I was going to say small because it's very specific. It's no less important, but something very, very defined that could come out of that through the networking opportunity that this forum has provided for you all. So it's a little bit challenging to say we're going to do this. I don't think that would be appropriate either, but I think we could share with this group some of the key messages and some suggested areas which could be taken forward as really, really interesting areas for exploration within this group, and then I imagine beyond it. But I've very much looked to Professor Tira and CRUI for us to have a conversation about this afterwards, and then come back to you all as a group. I don't know if that sits okay with everyone. Professor Tira, back to you. How does that sit with you?
Yes, it's okay. And I think maybe, I don't know if you want to spend a few words about the Pontignano conference. I don't know if it is the case.
Sure, that's a very good idea. So there is an opportunity for at the Pontignano, the bilateral UK-Italy Pontignano conference, which will run this year from the 1st to the 3rd of October. We are planning a face-to-face conference, but we have a plan B that it could all be online if absolutely necessary. So there is an opportunity for us to take aspects of this conversation forward at the Pontignano conference in one of the workshops, which focuses on education and culture. So that's something that we could absolutely put into the mix in terms of summarising the opportunity. And while I have your attention, I just would like to flag another opportunity which you might well be interested in. On the 30th of September 30, we are launching our Next Generation Italy research. We're calling it the World Remote, which is obviously very pertinent to this conversation. It's part of our UK-Italy 2020 season of culture, and it will take place the day before the Pontignano conference. You will all be very welcome to attend that. It's a virtual conference, a virtual roundtable event, and I think it might be very interesting, particularly as it is that the focus of that research are the young people that attend the universities where you work. I mean, particularly in Italy, but the research we've also carried out in the UK. So we can contact you about that and make sure that you have that information. But yes, Professor Tira, Pontignano is the forum through which we could absolutely take this to a next stage and have some further discussion with some very high-level individuals who will also be at that conference. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. So I think that we will write down one short page of what we discussed today. And personally, I was very much interested in the discussion. I think we have touched all the topics we are worried about. So that was just with UK and Italy, but I think we have 90% of the topics we could have addressed even in a larger forum with many other European or not only European countries. So that was very interesting. Feel free to share these minutes with, I don't know, your colleagues. I will do it with the Rectors Conference in Italy next week. And I think we can have a feedback as soon as we receive the minutes and continue these contacts and look at the September-October meetings in Pontignano as a deadline for continuing the discussion and the sharing. At that time, we will be fully in the autumn semester, so we will also able to report, I think, the difficulties and problems and challenges we will have at that time, and hoping that the situation in Europe and in the world will be much better than today at that time. We really do hope that, because in any case, we are really looking forward that this pandemic is going to an end. Remembering, first of all the people that died in this tragedy. I can say, because I'm living in a town in Italy where the virus hit more seriously than in other places. And so I really look forward for us to meet personally together. That would be the signal that this pandemic at least will be finished. So thank you very much to all the intervention, to all the speakers. Maybe Uta, if you can send us the slides, I would be personally very pleased. And thank you to the staff in CRUI. Also, the director, Emanuela Stefani, was connecting with us. Thank you very much. And all the staff of the British Council. And thank you, Rachel, for giving us the opportunity of this meeting. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you, Professor Tira. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye to everyone.
Bye.